Hello and a very warm welcome to Political Economy with Shweta Punj. This week we are talking about everything all at once. Well, not quite literally that, but it is the latest book, Everything All at Once, India and the Six Simultaneous Global Transitions by Dr. Rajiv Kumar and Ishan Joshi. Dr. Rajiv Kumar is a veteran policymaker and one of India's foremost economists. In the book, Dr. Kumar and Ishan argue that India must develop an agile, innovative and an inclusive policy framework to navigate a very complex and a fragmented new world order. The authors have identified 6 simultaneous transitions impacting the globe in geopolitics, technology, demographics, environment, capitalism, and democracy. And of course, they urge India to seize this historic opportunity to lead. Welcome, Dr. Kumar. Thank you so much for joining us on the
Thanks,
show.
Shweta. Thank you. Real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's our pleasure, absolutely, sir. And the timing of the book is so significant from an economic and a geopolitical perspective. So I want to begin by asking you this, and you've been my compliments to you and Ishan Joshi on putting together such a comprehensive analysis. And what I found to be very refreshing and insightful is that you really don't hold back in your prescriptions. You really don't hold back in saying things that maybe we needed to hear, but no one was telling us. So I think that's very, very important. Of course, we'll come to those details. But let me just begin by asking you a very fundamental question. During the research of this book and while putting together this book, what's been your assessment on where are we as a nation at the moment? You have you've spoken about global transitions, and that's the core of the core essence of the book, and that is exactly what is very intimidating as well. So where do you see India's vulnerabilities at this point and India's strengths?
Yeah. So Shweta, once more, a great pleasure to be here, and thanks for all the good words about the book. And where India is at the moment, that we have built our foundations rather well. We've achieved a 6.5% rate of growth for about 3 decades. So therefore, we are now in a position to take on these challenges. That's the sort of fundamental point, as it were, which is that India has now the wherewithal. It's in terms of its skills and talents, in entrepreneurial abilities, in governance capabilities, in technology capabilities. We have achieved a lot in the last 35 since 40 years since liberalization in 1995. So that's our strength. Our weakness is at the moment that we don't recognize that these challenges that we point out in the book are actually real and are going to be on us or are already on us, and which is why we continue with incremental change. We continue with incremental tinkering of the policy framework, while we really need a completely fresh approach if we are going to tackle the challenges that are now upon us and convert them into an opportunity. So that's the weakness, which is that we seem to be complacent about what we have achieved, rather than say that, look, this is where we need to now really get our act together and tackle all these challenges so that we can become an exemplar for the rest of the world.
So would you say, Dr. Kumar, that this is a reset moment for India? Many have spoken about it. Many have also called it the 1991 moment for India. However, I don't really agree with the 1991 analogy, because I think India was in a very, very different situation then. But in terms of the challenges, and you've also identified the geopolitical shifts that we are facing, the decline of the United States and the rise of a multipolar world, growing influence of China, and so on. So let's begin with the decline of the United States. You say that the hegemony has been shaken. It's will we see, are we approaching a world where America will no longer be the sole decider of how politics and economics shape in different parts of the world?
So that's very clear by now. In fact, it is quite amazing that when we started doing the work for this book about a year and a half ago, we had no such inclination, we had no such clear ideas as to what will happen with the U.S. But now it's becoming sort of clearer by the day that under President Trump, the U.S. has gone back to its historical position of being an isolationist and looking after its own interests, narrow country interests, rather than be the hegemon or rather than be responsible for the world order, which had
Hmm.
been since the Second World War. Because that's the responsibility that it took upon itself. And, there was a cost to it, which the US bore, sometimes grudgingly, but otherwise, quite sort of happily, because that gave them the right to run the world as they thought, and the multilateral trading order. But that's all changed in the last year or two. But that was also beginning to change over some time because of the emergence of other economies, especially like China, which
Hmm.
today in PPP terms, I think the share of the Chinese economy in the world economy is just short of the share of the US economy in the world economy, right? So and what we are saying is that with the rise of Asia, and in
Hmm.
Asia, which was about 50% of the world economy in the until 1850, this is changing, and because of this change, the situation of a single hegemon running the
Hmm.
whole world, and its writ being run all over, will no longer hold. It cannot hold. So therefore, we are saying is that this is a new world in which we have to we have to come to grips with the fact that the US will be a declining hegemon. There will
Hmm.
be others which are emerging. It will not be a very easy passage, because no hegemonic power ever gave way, without, just so easily. So it will be a contested, a space. It will be a contested space in the decades to come. And in that contestation, India will have to, look for its own policy, own policy framework as to what sort of role it can play in defining or in designing the new world order, which is emerging, and which is bound to become, which is bound to be reinforced over time. But just one other thing, which is that you're absolutely right that this is not the 1991 moment at all. Then
Hmm.
1991, and I was in the Ministry of Finance, and we had just 2 weeks of reserves left for us. Just 2 weeks of foreign exchange reserves. Today we have 800 billion dollars, and 700 billion dollars, 800 tons of gold, etc. So India is in a much stronger, much better position to
Hmm.
tackle these challenges. And a lot of in 1991, our main challenge was the main challenges were internal, but today they are internal as well as external, and others which are coming through with the environment and the technology. So very different. So therefore, we can't sort of look back to 1991 and say, here is the recipe for us to do all that again. No, what we emphasize in the book is that we need to do completely new approach. What we say is that we have to have a fresh thinking policy framework to be able to convert these challenges into our opportunities. And we believe that we can do it because we have, as I said earlier, all the necessary resources for us to be able to do it. And especially in the last 10 years, it has really become very clear that when India sets out to do, sort of achieve things, then we can do that. So I think that's a big difference. But coming back to the U.S. situation, we don't see a period going forward where US will recover its status as the only superpower in the world, which had happened after 1991. I think those are gone, and we should be prepared for a multipolar world, and for India to be ready to play a much bigger, if you like, a more significant role in designing the global order.
Hmm, absolutely, Dr. Kumar, very significant points that you raised there. Let me begin with the multipolar world. Where do you see India's positioning in that? Because typically, until now, we've been in a bipolar world, and that's that augurs well when it comes to stability. It leads to more stability in policy making. Generally, the perception is a bipolar world works better, in terms of law and order, safety, security, policy certainty, and so on. But now, with a multipolar world and the growing influence of China, how should India be working with China? Because it's a very, very complicated relationship. It's an economic relationship, but it's also, from a safety perspective, from a national integrity perspective, we have China right on our border, and so we've seen friction with China on that front as well. So how do we deal with China?
Shweta, I think the most important point that we make in the book is that the best foreign policy for India at the moment is to
Hmm.
focus laser-like on improving our domestic economy, on
Hmm.
accelerating our rate of growth, on making sure that those at the bottom of the pyramid get what is due, and have a better life, are more prosperous. I mean, in that sense, we can learn from what China did in 1990, which is
Hmm.
when, following the Xiaoping's dictum, they said,
Hmm.
put out your lights, focus on your domestic economy, and get on with it. Because if we do that, that is when we will emerge, certainly emerge as the third pole in the world moving forward, third or the fourth pole if you count Europe. So I think that's the first point that we have to make. In doing so, in accelerating the rate of growth of our domestic economy, reducing the inequalities, eliminating the poverty, improving our skills, etc., it will be very beneficial for us to engage with China. That's what we are
Hmm.
saying. But to engage with China, because China today, as we point out, leads in, more than, out of the 63 leading technologies in the world, cutting technology, China is leading in 54 of them. So they have now the
Hmm.
technological, strength. They are 5 times our size. They have $3.1 trillion in reserves, and they have huge amounts of capital surplus for investment in other countries, which they are doing. So I think all of those mean that we can engage fruitfully with them, successfully with them, in economic terms. And we should therefore, I think, review Press Note 3, which is what has hindered the flow of Chinese
Hmm.
FDI and the Chinese skills and technology into country. We should review it as soon as possible, and
Hmm.
intensify our economic engagement as much
Hmm.
as we can, and
Hmm.
and and also work with them to get better access to their market, to their very large market today, for our own exports and goods and services. At the
Hmm.
same time, what we are saying is that, look, on the border, on political terms, we need to be firm, and we need
Hmm.
to demonstrate to the Chinese, and I think they understand that by now, that there are some red lines which they have to observe about the Chinese. But at the same time, those red lines are there, but at the same time, we don't need to get, sort of, how do I say, we don't need to extend our claims, or we don't need to exaggerate our own claims at this point of time for the border. So let that be a
Hmm.
quiet border for the next decade or two, and because
Hmm.
that will benefit us far more. Because with that we can then engage with China for our own, for our own accelerated economic development, and that's
Hmm.
what we do. So that's our approach to China. And in this situation, we should be clear that it will have to be strategic autonomy of our foreign policy. We don't need to be in any camp, whatever. And I think, as our foreign minister has said sometimes, which is that we have to adopt the approach of, or horses for courses, wherever, whatever we need to do. And that's one part. And the second part, if I may sort of just extend my response, is that to work with China and other intermediate economies, and that you can include Europe as well as Russia, to try and frame or design a new world order which has been completely disrupted by the President Trump today, and the U.S. For some
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
The role of the WTO, the role of the fund and the bank and the UN have all sort of become quite you said, quite blurred and fragmented. And the fact is that Thomas Friedman's statement about the world is flat is no longer true. And so
Hmm.
therefore, if India can work with its allies, in the global south as well as in the other powers of the world, we can try and create a world which is still benefits with the globalization and better access to each other's markets and technologies. So
Hmm.
that's what I think. And I think China will be really willing to play that role, with us. So I think we
Hmm.
should explore that as much
Hmm.
as far as possible,
Hmm.
while at the same time being very sure about our own red lines, politically or in security terms.
Hmm. Do you think, Dr. Kumar, that in hindsight, maybe we should have joined RCEP, or maybe we should consider joining RCEP now, because it'll give us more negotiating power. It'll give us greater heft as we, navigate a very tumultuous global environment.
I don't think it was that we missed the bus on RCEP. We decided on that for very good ground, which is that we felt that the competitiveness, our industry didn't have the global competitiveness that would be required to take advantage of the RCEP.
Hmm.
And the examples of other bilateral FTAs that we had signed with ASEAN or Thailand or Korea, but also, showing us that, our partners were taking much greater advantage of those FTAs than we were able to. So I think, therefore, that decision was, I think, quite right. Now, yes, I think we should consider rejoining the RCEP. But prior to that, again, I'm saying we need to focus still on our competitiveness of the domestic economy. We have to
Hmm.
ensure, for example, one of the things that we're saying in the book is that let's have every state of India have a distinct and well worked out export policy for itself, and how it will encourage its exporters to become globally competitive or become
Hmm.
part of the global supply chain. Once we
Hmm.
do that, the next 2, 3, 4 years, and we should do it as urgently as possible, then we'll be
Hmm.
ready to join the RCEP and take advantage of it. But yes, RCEP is a multi-state, multinational sort of formation, and our us. And once we have achieved what I just said about our global scale and global competitiveness, the fear of China, utilizing that, unfairly to sort of really, come into our markets and exploit our market, I think that fear would be taken care of. So, in
Hmm.
short, yes, we should join RCEP, but take the necessary steps before that in a time-bound manner in the next
Hmm.
2 or 3 years to be prepared to take advantage of RCEP.
Hmm, interesting. You also talk about a rethink in the development model that you've spoken about even now, and you've spoken about a new measure of progress, which is a gross welfare product metric to move beyond a singular focus on GDP growth. Why is that, and what would this gross welfare product metric? I mean, how is it going to be different from the GDP growth model that we are following and the world is following?
Yeah, I think the GDP model developed by Simon Kuznets has outlived its utility. Because GDP today, average GDP hides more than it reveals, as it were. Because
Hmm.
you can have a country which is growing quite rapidly in average GDP terms, but it's people at the bottom of its pyramid or the lower income segments, could be suffering, may not have the right kind of the desired levels of living, and it may be using up its natural capital in a manner which is totally exploitative and which is unsustainable. And as somebody, as many more and more people are pointing out, this average GDP growth and just to focus on it and just go for it is now breaching planetary boundary conditions. We will not. So that therefore, what we are saying is that let's have a new index called the gross welfare product. And it's not something entirely new, because if you remember, President Macron had commissioned Professor Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz to come out with a global happiness index or something like that. But what we're saying is that there should be five components of it on which we should, which we should include in this. One, of course, is the growth of income or GDP. The second is your use of natural capital. How much are you using up natural capital? So the decline in natural capital, the less it is, the better off you are. The third is, how is your education doing? Is your population getting educated? The fourth is about health. So these are the two HDI indicators, which are important to be achieved. And the last one is actually the most important one, which is, I think, that we should include there the rate of growth of per capita incomes of the last decile of our population. This is the philosophy of Antyodaya. Deen Dayal Upadhyay ji had said many decades ago about this. He talked about it, and we had that model, but we haven't actually in a way implemented that. And it is India's sort of dharohar legacy to be able to do that. To measure how the large decile of the population is doing, and no less than a person like Francois Bourgogne, who was the chief economist of the World Bank, had actually formally proposed that, from when he was the World Bank chief economist. So now is the time to take this, sort of, bold step, a new step, and we have the statistical strength, more than enough to be able to, compute this. But if we take the lead here, we can become the exemplars for the rest of the world, and especially for Africa. Because Africa, if it grows just following the GDP road, will go nowhere, and we will end up in an environment disaster, which will not which we can't afford. So that's what we are suggesting. That just rather than only focus on GDP, let's talk about the gross welfare product and set ourselves targets. When you're talking about Viksit Bharat, we should set ourselves targets in those terms, which is I think similar to what the Honorable Prime Minister says when he talks about life, which is living style which is friendly to the environment. So I mean that's but we have tried to quantify it. We've tried to suggest a sort of quantitative framework for it, for our statisticians, to try and get to work on it and set up a system, a model for the rest of the world.
I'm very curious, Dr. Kumar, if you've proposed this to the government in a formal manner, and what's been the feedback that you've gotten from the government, because we do know that the government listens to you when it comes to matters of the economy. So is this something that has made it to a list of recommendations that the government of India might be considering?
Shweta, not yet. The book is being released on the 21st, and after which we will try and make the efforts to get it to the right quarters. But again, I'm sort of what I'm practical enough to believe that it will take a lot of doing before the government starts working on something like that. But one thing that we're already working with the states on, which is akin to this, is what is trying to do, make districts as a fulcrum of development. And what we are doing there with more than one states, Assam and Madhya Pradesh and now Maharashtra, is to estimate the GDP, the district GDP, and use that as a baseline, and then say that there, we'll use that to then give targets for ourselves to where the growth would be, and in that framework, we'll bring in the gross welfare product, because I think the states are quite clear in their mind that it is the welfare of the people and their environmental sustainability. So so we will work with the states to begin with, and then hopefully come to the center and get the center's attention, because again I think a lot of action is now in the states, and each state of us is so unique in its own way that if we do that in each one of them, I think that can be we can use them as pilots, then to say that this is what the national model can be.
So, any states, Dr. Kumar, that you believe would be in the first ones to adopt this? Any states that have made substantial progress in this?
Well, we have gone most furthest in Assam. We've signed an MOU with the government. The government has declared that we have to estimate the GDP for all their districts, and the chief minister has declared that the district magistrates will now be called the CEOs, and our job is estimate the baseline GDP in each district, and from there set targets. for which the district administration will be accountable to the society. And we have argued, and we are trying to bring all the stakeholders on that same platform. So that's so there, and then we are now beginning to do that also in Madhya Pradesh, and we've signed an MOU there as well. And by the way, to me, these things came from our work in Niti Aayog on aspirational districts, which
Right.
the becomes, had so emphatically pushed forward, saying that if you change the governance, then you can bring these districts to the national level. And that's what we are trying to do, to make the districts in our country, all the 750 of them, as the fulcrum of our development. And rather than make it top down, make it bottom up, because that will then, I think, create a much better framework for what I call short-term accountability. Short-term accountability is how is the government, how is governance accountable to its various stakeholders, whether it's the industry or the civil society or the academia, and there needs to be that. And we can achieve that because through this, we can actually set key performance indicators for our district administration. Because if that can be done in the corporate sector, surely it can be done in the government sector. And I think it's time that we did that, because
Right.
otherwise, we may set target, but which are never achieved. But this will be the way to make sure that we also focus on time-bound implementation and execution of the targets or of the policy that we are talking about.
Any timelines, Dr. Kumar, on this one?
Not yet, too early for me to say, but we are at it, and because it does take time. But as they say, watch for this space in the coming months. It'll
Okay.
something will happen in the next year. You will hear some news on this within the next year.
Interesting. I also want to talk to you, about the private sector, the role of the private sector. We've just unleashed what are being called as the next generation reforms. There's been a complete reset of the goods and services tax. It's been rationalized further, and the expectation and the hope is that the industry will be passing on these tax rate cuts to the Aam Janta. Now, over the years, there's been a lot that's happened for the private sector in terms of rationalization of corporate tax rates, and now we have the GST rationalization. We've seen emphasis on ease of doing business and so on. Yet, the private sector has remained somewhat reticent when it comes to increasing or expanding their production capacities within India, while they've gone and explored opportunities elsewhere. But we've seen that the role has been fairly, I mean, it's I'm not taking away from the fact that the private sector has contributed immensely, but the expectation has been that the private sector would emerge as a key driver for growth. However, until now, it's been the government government enabled sectors, government investment, which has been really powering India's growth. So I want to get a sense on that. When we talk about resetting the development model, how do we get the private sector more invested in the India story?
We must remember in this context that over the centuries, when as William Dalrymple points out, from 300 BC to 1200 AD, it was the India, it was the India sphere, as it were, in the world. All that was driven by the private sector. The glorious days for India, when its ran from Jakarta to the Red Sea, was done by the private sector. So I'm pointing this out simply to say that we have not yet reset that role of the private sector in our economy, and that needs to be done. We have to trust our private entrepreneurs and our private enterprise, to be able to take India forward. And the government must be seen as being supportive at all times of the efforts of the private sector. And the key here is to develop a mutual trust between the private enterprise and the government, which is not in every country which is successful anywhere in the world at any point of time. There was this trust-based relationship between the government and the private sector. Now here the shoe is on both feet. Where the private sector as well as the government. Because the private sector also has to show very clearly, demonstrate very clearly that they are deserving of the trust of the government, that they will not take shortcuts or they will not adopt methods and so on which are not which, if you like, which are not legal or which are not ethical. And the government also has to show that we are going to change from being a regulatory state to a promotional state. The Prime Minister has said this so often in many speeches, that the regulatory burden, the compliance burden, the laws which are dysfunctional, the criminalization, etc., and the government is working on it. Now that has to now seep down the levels of bureaucracy, where actually the private sector interfaces with the government. And at that level, the private sector should feel that the government is not out to there to sort of, to as it were, to sort of punish them, but more to sort of promote them. And I think now whether, and this is beginning to happen in some places, whether it's the land acquisition or the availability of power or the connection that you get or the licenses, etc. So I think that's, we have to declare a policy in every state or all over the country that for India, the private sector is the key to its growth. And because it is, therefore, it will be supported by all possible means, for it to become globally competitive and have the global scale in its operation. Now, one of the things that it requires here is that at the moment the private sector industry subsidizes domestic consumption. And the best example of that example is energy cost. Whether the industrial rate, the so-called commercial rates are much, much higher than the rates that you and I pay for our household domestic energy consumption. Now, that raises costs for the industry, and that means that the industry then has to becomes less competitive compared to its global peers. Things like that will have to change, and the sooner the better, so that we can, labor laws, the codification of labor laws, the beginning of the Apprenticeship Act, etc. There's so many places,
Right.
where, and what we found is that uh, where at the ground level still, the role of the government doesn't come through as being promotional, but comes through more as being regulatory and control, and controlling of the private activities than what it should be. Yeah.
As we talk about supporting industry, there are two views emerging, right? One is that we are in a very protectionist world. U.S. president has been talking about rising barriers to protect American industry, and hence that makes a case to further protect the Indian industry. That's one view that's emerged. The other is that we need to open up our sectors more to greater competition. We are negotiating free trade agreements. We should allow imports at lower tariffs, and we should let go of tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. And now we've protected the Indian industry enough, and now they should be competing. Where do you stand on this debate, Dr. Kumar?
My view has been very clear that we don't need more protection for our industry. And when we had the high levels of protection before 1991, we produced the most uncompetitive and the most inefficient products that we were forced to consume or we were forced to work with, in the past. And I think therefore that's not the way for us. Two is that given that we are only about a $3,000 per capita economy, we need external demand to grow and to take our rate of growth from the current 6.5% to 8.5%, which is required if India is to achieve its aspiration of being a Viksit Bharat by the centenary of our independence. Now, that external demand will be achieved only if our exports grow much faster than what they have done so far. I mean, it's and you can look at it, Vietnam, Bangladesh, China. I mean, their rates of growth of exports have been much higher than what we have, and we have been an export pessimist economy for a very long time. It's high time that we change that completely. And if accessing the foreign market requires us to give up our remaining tariff barriers, so be it. In fact, it's not good to be known to be the highest tariff, player in the world, which we our average tariffs have been very high. So that I think we should try and to change that. But combined with that, we should have a trust-based industrial policy. And PLI is an attempt at that, the production linked incentive scheme. But again, there, what you need to do is for the government and the industry to work as closely possible as they can. Now, this is happening in electronics, for example, Apple. This is what we did, with Apple, and it's beginning to happen in the semiconductor industry, that the government and the industry, sort of are working together to create those capabilities in India. This should happen across the board. And this should happen, as I said earlier, state by state. Every state can choose or identify its own competitive or comparative advantage, and then work with the industry to take their exporters to a different level altogether. So,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely, India has to be an open economy. And if there are tariff barriers which are raising the cost for our inputs, for our exports, I think they should go. Clearly, we should not have, inverse duty rates in any case. So in all of those things, I feel, we will benefit with an open economy, provided, and that's a big proviso, that
Hmm.
industry and government learn to trust each other, work with each other, and have a common target of making India, a developed, a high-income country in a time-bound manner. I don't say by when, but they should have a common goal, and that's
Hmm.
what's needed.
Hmm. I also want to talk to you about climate change and growth. Climate change is a reality. However, India has always, our stance has been that we didn't contribute to it. The developing world did, and now is our time to grow. So while it's a priority and we've committed to the sustainable development goals, but we need to prioritize growth over climate change. Now, I want to get your sense on, do we need to make this as a trade-off, or can both happen simultaneously?
So the first thing for Shweta, is that absolutely the world has not been fair to us. Our per capita emissions are among the lowest in the world, and all the situation that we have today, the developed economies are responsible for it because they went for growth and etc. and really sort of plundered the environment, and and didn't give a hoot about it. And so they have a responsibility for doing that, which they are not meeting at the moment. And so therefore the successive COPs, they have all their commitments they've not fulfilled, and I think it's important that they do it. So that's there. But at the same time, for us, if we uh, depend whatever the others may be doing or not, can we have high growth without caring for our environment? That is where we say we cannot have that. Simply because if whatever we need to do for ourselves, we have to make sure that our per capita emissions don't continue to rise at the rate at which they are doing. India is actually doubling its emissions every 8 years, and we are still on the rising curve. We need to change that. Therefore, we need to adopt policies, in sector after sector, which can be, which can be sustainable and which are environmental friendly. And let me give you just two examples. Urbanization. We can surely have an urbanization which is not based on, individual ownership of passenger cars, or which is not based on all the high-rise buildings which are completely, carbon, emitting, carbon positive, and have all. We can create cities, which are carbon negative, and as has been done in some other countries. And because 450 million people are still waiting to be urbanized, we can focus on public transport, on the environment, on the air quality, and on the way we build our dwellings, which use less and less of the environmental unfriendly
Hmm.
sort of material. The second example is our agriculture. We've done our amazing work with our biochemical based green revolution. But now the thing is that 14% of our methane emissions are coming from agriculture, and our soil quality has become so degraded, that we really have converted the entire land into basically unarable land and using more and more. So can we find an alternative to it? We are suggesting in our book that let's in a large scale test the feasibility of zero chemical farming. Because if you can change to that, because chemical farming means huge exploitation of your groundwater resources. We are already a water stressed economy. We'll be a water distressed economy very soon. So can we try that experiment? Can our ICAR, the Agricultural Research Establishment, can it not focus now on finding different paradigms to the biochemical revolution that we've had so far? And can we also not think of combining frontier technology, which is maybe even AI or optical sensors or whatever, to make sure that we optimize the use of all our resources and can move away from this very sort of exclusively chemical based agricultural growth that we have,
Yeah.
which has spoiled our environment, which has made our soil completely inarable, and which has had huge health consequences on us, on the consumers as well as on the farmers. So that's the thought. The thought is that no, you know, rather than think about growth and environment as a trade-off, let's think about designing policies that can achieve both growth as well as protect the environment. And we are saying is that's possible. That's feasible now in the new world with the new technologies. We can do that, and India should set an example for the others to try and do that and to be successful in doing so.
To take that thought forward on the different paradigm for agricultural growth, as you know, that's our red line when it comes to our negotiations with the United States, that we will not, we will continue to protect our farmers and agricultural sector. How do we, and there has been a lot of talk about, what more do we need to do to make our farm sector more competitive, because we've been giving out subsidies for a very long time, and that's happening across the world. And like you said, that it's a very chemical-led growth. So, how do we reset the agricultural paradigm? We still have a big percentage of India's population dependent on agriculture for their livelihood. So, where do we go from here where agricultural growth is concerned?
So the first is that we need to, we should, as Prime Minister said, protect our farmers from, sort of, excessive imports, and especially those which are based on GMOs, etc., because that's not going to be, feasible socially or politically. How to make our agriculture competitive is, I said, we've got to think about reducing cost of production and improving yield. And how do we reduce the cost of production? And one of the ways is, and there may be others also, which is that one of the ways would be to replace the chemical inputs, whether it's herbicide, pesticide, or chemical fertilizers, which with locally available inputs, and see whether that's feasible. So it's a long game. It won't happen overnight. But I think the example for in Himachal Pradesh with the orchards, with the apple orchards, are very significant. Which is that all those people who are able to switch from chemical-based horticulture to natural, zero chemical horticulture, have found that their fruits are more nourishing, their costs have gone down, and their shelf life is improved. So if that is an example, why not go sort of full scale into finding out whether this can be scaled throughout the country. Similarly, for our grains, there is now about 3 million farmers in this country who are using non-chemical methods of farming in Andhra and in Gujarat and in Himachal, etc. Now, so let's let the agricultural establishment, all our agriculture universities, the 123 ICR institute, work on that and come up with models for our farmers which are less expensive, which lose, and where the yields can be maintained with a combination of new technology as well as these inputs. So I think that's the way to go. We can't do it overnight, but the third point, however, is that what we can do overnight is to greatly improve the share of agro processing in our agricultural output, so that the farmers can get a higher value for their product, which they don't do at the moment. And there's 25% wastage of agricultural output, etc. Now, if we do that, the farmers, and this has happened, for example, in Maharashtra with the grapes. After all, they are, the farmers are equity holders in the grape country, which are producing some of the best wines. So something like that can be achieved for others in agro processing. And the last thing is that if we follow a, a non-chemical and natural way of farming, our farmers will get the carbon credits because they'll be sequestering the carbon in their soil because there is now enough evidence to show that if you do that, and that can be an additional source of income for our farmers. Now, but again, all of these things, they're not become mainstream thoughts. They're not become a part of the public narrative. Which is that is what we need to do. This is seen as a sort of marginal activity done by some, but no, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research should be charged with this and say that look, within the next 2 or 3 years, please come out with having examined the feasibility in a very scientific way of what is being proposed, and or just ask them simply, tell us what to do to reduce the cost of the farmers. Maybe that's the challenge they should be given to them, and and because that's the only way to go forward. Because if the costs remain high, we'll be uncompetitive, and there'll be pressures on us for us to reduce the cost of our food, which is a wage, which is a wage good, by imports, and that we can't afford.
You also talk about the need to preserve social cohesion. You say that it's very, very important for India, and the national motto of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas should be applied to everyone without exception to avoid the erosion caused by unbridled majoritarianism. What is it that you're referring to here, Dr. Kumar? Do you, do we see a sense of that erosion of trust not only in India, it's happening across the world as well? And this unbridled majoritarianism. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Shweta, I think we've said enough in the book, but to answer your point, India's diversity is its strength, and that is what we need to build upon. That's our diversity, which is our strength, and we can use this to create a social capital, which will be recognized everywhere in the world as being unique to us, and that can set a model for the whole world because the world is very diverse. And if we can show that we can bring everybody together, to our single objective of improving the people's lives and reaching, and reaching the levels of Viksit Bharat, that can then be an example of the rest of the world. Now, here I think it's suffice it to say that in the policies that are being implemented by the government, you don't see any discrimination, and we should accept that. That's a fact, and which is an amazing, achievement. In all the schemes, whether it's Swabhag or Ujjwala or or housing, etc., there is zero discrimination. Now, therefore, I think the sort of the public narrative that goes around saying that there is the majority is being somehow overbearing, I think is not borne out by facts. But somehow, because maybe of the nature of our politics, of our electoral system, the negative aspects of this social interaction get highlighted, and which is a pity, because at the ground level, I just saw a figure saying that the number of riots in our country is now plummeted to very amazingly unprecedented levels, and the society is willing to live together and to work with together. So I think those are the tendencies that we need to strengthen.
Hmm.
And I think this is happening in a very large part of our country already, and I'm sure that this will be achieved in the other remaining parts where we will learn to, as it were, appreciate each other's diversity and point of view rather than think about dominating one by the other.
Interesting. Dr. Kumar, my closing question. We started the conversation with this, that we stand at a junction today, and at a time that we've not seen in the past few decades. Of course, India has had its share of challenges, but like the book says, everything is happening all at once for India. So, what would be your short-term policy prescription for the government to ensure that India rides the wave, is able to tide over this time when it's facing multiple challenges on all counts, whether it's a very volatile neighborhood. We've seen Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal being completely torn apart. Then we have the United States, we have China. So it is a very complicated time for us. What would be your short term policy prescription for the government?
I think I said it earlier, which is that we've got to we've got to sort of you've got to emphasize that all stakeholders in our country, and we identify four of them: the government, the industry, the civil society, and the academia, have to be brought together on a platform based on trust. And and this maybe the onus of that is on the government, to be able to lead that way forward. That's one. The second that I've is that we've got to again sort of emphasize that the private sector will be encouraged to take the country forward, and wherever we can create more spaces for them, that will be created. That's the second. The third, and we got the Niti Ashtang in our last chapter. We point out eight ways things to do as we go forward, is to recognize that human capital is our greatest and the best resource, and which is world competitive. So therefore, develop it, and therefore
Hmm.
focus on education. The national education policy, is there, implement it, but take it down to the low, take it down to the sort of every level possible. And here I have one which I don't think I've specified in the book, is that universal universal access to good quality, high quality primary education is a necessary condition for us. And that is what we should ensure tomorrow, if we can.
Hmm.
And if that
Hmm.
and universal access. And if that means that we will, I don't know how to put it, which is, but if that means that all primary education has to be public sector, has to be government, so that everybody has the same access to the same quality, high quality of education, so be it. And finally, here is that we have done it already. We have begun to do it already, and which is that our health indicators, whether it's maternal mortality, infant mortality, or malnutrition among women and children, etc., that has to be taken care of. So short term, focus on HDIs, human development indicators. Make
Hmm.
sure we can achieve human development indicators of the OECD level, but at our per capita income level is possible, and it's been shown that it can be done. So that's one. And two, encourage the private sector and create that trust and confidence in them, that they are the ones who will take us forward. And third is that you know think out of the box and get people together, so that what we call as the new Sagar Manthan, intellectual Manthan, has to be done. So India today needs that intellectual, sort of,
Hmm.
how to call it, intellectual churning, for us to come out with solutions which will help us meet the challenges that we face today. So those are the
Hmm.
three, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay,
which are the
very quickly, I just have to also ask you, what's your growth outlook for the year? Do we see the momentum continuing, or do you think that there will be a significant impact of high tariffs on India's growth, and the year might not see as robust of growth that one would expect or one would want?
Well, we should understand that Q1 figures are not the do not project the future. I mean that's happened for whatever reasons happened, and given that the other thing will play out, I would see our growth at at about 6.5%, 6.2 to 6.5%, in the coming for the full year. And what we need to do is to work towards raising this in the coming years, up to 8%, and that, as I said, is possible. And but for this year, FY26, I think we'll achieve between 6 and 6.5%.
So 7.8% growth, you're not reading too much into it, the
No,
first
I'm
quarter
not. In
numbers.
fact, there are several indicators which show that this might be, if you like, a flash in the pan and may not be sustained, going forward. The IIP data, the ASI data, the energy consumption data, the cargo, etc., etc. So I think it's good that we've done it, but I don't think this momentum we should not expect it to continue.
All right.
That's the
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, for that perspective. I'm just going to show what the book looks like here. It's called Everything All at Once: India and the Six Simultaneous Global Transitions. It's for all students of policy, for everyone who's interested in India's economy. I would recommend this book, and of course, always a pleasure to have you, Dr. Kumar. Really give us insights which are very which are very candid and very real. And I think some of the suggestions that you made in the book are very helpful, and we do hope that you find many takers for these suggestions. Thank you very much for joining us, and a
Thank
big
you very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much,
sir.
Shweta. Real pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for recommending our book. And I hope to see you soon. Thanks a lot.
I hope so. I hope to see you too, sir. And a big thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. Do leave us your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Just to quickly summarize what Dr. Rajiv Kumar has spoken about, he's categorically said that the time for India is now, and India needs to focus on human capital. It needs a responsive policy framework and agile governance, and most interestingly, he's made a proposal for a gross welfare product metric to which is different from the singular focus on GDP. And his argument is that the GDP does not necessarily capture progress or challenges based on societal well-being, education, health and environmental balance. And he's also spoken about how climate change and growth, they cannot be a trade-off between the two. Both have to work simultaneously. He's insisted that as India grows, we must protect our social cohesion and inclusivity. And most importantly, he also talks about India's demographic dividend, and he talks about the decline of US hegemony and the rise of a multipolar world, which includes the growing influence of China and the need for India to reassess its strategy when it comes to dealing with China. Well, with that, it's a wrap from all of us here. We do hope that you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back with more next week. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.